Hey everyone, this might seem like a topic that doesn't seem to intertwine, these two shows seem very different, but I promise you I have a point. I'm going to be comparing 13 Reasons Why and You, more specifically season 1 episode 13 of 13 Reasons Why and season 3 episode 4 of You, as they both show suicide in the show. First, starting off with 13 Reasons Why, it's no secret that this show is popular for not very good reasons. This show was a complete dumpster fire and actual detrimental for suicide and mental health awareness, even though their show was trying to paint it in a good light and start a conversation, whatever that means. It showed the warnings for suicide and self-harm in this episode before it aired. On Netflix, it had the little card thing. It turns out that the warning did not mention anything about self-harm. It mentioned the suicide, which is good, but it only said that it had graphic depictions of violence, which could mean literally anything. And the argument could be said that people don't want spoilers for how the suicide happened, but I also think that showing a spoiler is less harmful than blatantly showing something that is super triggering, especially to people watching who might have experience with self-harm and attempted suicide. But it was still very graphic, and it was still super triggering to me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one either. Mental health experts also called out this show for its graphic nature, as it acted as kind of a how-to guide for self-harm and suicide, because it showed everything in detail. With this being said, there isn't any real proof that this show has directly caused an increase in self-harm and suicide, but just speaking from experience, if I was in a bad place and I watched this show, it would serve as some type of inspiration for me trying to end my life. That's just how I view it. And this is especially dangerous, showing in graphic detail the suicide, because this show is targeted at a younger audience, especially teenagers. When the first season came out, I was 18, so I was just on that cusp. And not only teenagers watched it, older people watched it. My brother, who's 4 years older than me, he watched it pretty much all the way through, and I know people younger than me by about 2-3 years also watched it, and I can only imagine how stressful that would have been for someone who is younger and more vulnerable and more susceptible would view this. I'm very lucky that I was in a relatively good headspace, but it still harmed my mental well-being. I was completely fucked up for a week after that, just because I couldn't think of anything else apart from that scene. So I can't even imagine what that would have been like for someone who was in a vulnerable state, someone who was depressed and possibly suicidal, to watch that. It might have either helped them understand how serious suicide is and how painful it is and decide to not go through with it, or decide Hannah's glorified in death. I want that to be me, because when she was alive, her life was so painful, but afterwards everyone glorified her, so I want that to be me. Netflix eventually took down the suicide self-harm scene, but this was 2 years after the episode aired, where most, if not all, the damage had already been done, because it had already appeared on Netflix and third third-party TV show websites. The damage is already done. People have seen it, people were negatively affected by it. I mean, not everyone hated it, but it still caused a lot of harm, and we can't ignore that. The show stood by this scene for so long as well. It didn't feel genuine to me when it was taken down. Brian Yorkie and the crew defended this scene, and it's not the actors' fault, because they were part of a show that became really popular, and they probably thought that they were doing something good. And in a sense they were, because everyone in the crew seems like the crew and cast seem like genuine people. The problem here, in my opinion, is Brian Yorkie, because he's the showrunner. He makes all the decisions of what happens in the show, and he directly went against advice from psychologists, as they said that it would be harmful. I understand that there is a responsibility to show that suicide isn't an easy way out, and that it's actually quite painful. I get that. But this was shown so recklessly, And again, against the direct advice of psychologists with years of experience in the field of mental health and mental illness, and would have done at least like 4 years of studying before that, and maybe more if they did a PhD or a master's or anything like that. While I was researching this scene and like, you know, why they decided to get rid of it and why they decided to go with it in the first place, I found out that one of the writers, Nick Sheff, decided to like go with this portrayal of the suicide scene because he was influenced by his own suicide attempt, and I completely sympathize with him. I hope he's doing better, but that's just not like the way I would have gone about it. And like, he was supported by producers and all that kind of stuff, and like his story is like the reason why like the show decided to like go ahead with the scene. But at the same time, like, it did cause a lot of harm, even if that wasn't the intention. So with this episode, there's not a lot to say because it wasn't like a main character suicide, but like we still kind of saw it through the main character's eyes, if that makes sense. Like, the trigger warning was shown straight away, and I was kind of expecting it to be like 13 Reasons Why level of shock value, because like this show is quite gory because it's about a literal psychopath who murders, and like those murders are quite graphic and like gory and like a lot of blood and all that kind of stuff, and very intense. So I was expecting the suicide to be like very intense, but I was surprised in a good way when we saw how the suicide was depicted, because it wasn't graphic and we only saw the aftermath. Also, another point against 13 Reasons Why, it's based on a book, and in the book Hannah takes a bunch of pills, which like isn't as much of a shock value, but it still like did the job, like it still ended her life. But in 13 Reasons Why, they were like, hey, let's just fucking make this as graphic as possible and go against direct advice of psychologists who understand the amount of harm that this can do to young, impressionable teenagers. But in You, Gil commits suicide by hanging himself, and we only saw what happened like afterwards. We didn't see in like graphic detail like what led to, like, we understand from context like why he did it, and I'll get into that in a bit, but like we don't see like every single step, and it doesn't provide like a how-to guide. So I very much appreciated that, and that's why I'm making the comparison. Next, I'm going to talk about like the reasons for their suicide. So with Hannah, I'm not going to go too much into it because there's like a lot of videos about 13 Reasons Why and like why it's problematic and all that stuff. And also, like, most people have watched the show. If not, they like understand what it's about because it was like highly marketed and everyone was talking about it. But with Hannah, she's a teenage girl. I think she's like 16 or 17. She was being bullied in school and went through like a lot because of that. She witnessed her former best friend being raped at a party, which is traumatizing enough on its own. But then couple months later, she was then raped by the same guy. And this is obviously traumatizing, and it would affect anyone's mental state who went through this. But this weighed significantly on Hannah, because in the show there's like 13 reasons, but like most of them are kind of petty. One of them is because she's on a list of like who has the fattest ass or something, and I kind of get it because like Bryce like sexually harasses her while at a convenience store, so I kind of understand how like that is like a cause and effect kind of thing, where like even though like the list in itself wasn't like meant to make someone suicidal, it led to Bryce sexually harassing her, and then she witnessed Bryce raping her then best friend Jessica, and then she got raped by him as well. So I can see how that would kind of all spiral down, along with like a bunch of other things that happened in the show, even though they seem inconsequential and like not a huge deal. Like when you add them all together, it's a lot. I already touched on this, but like in the book, Hannah took a bunch of pills, which just makes it like very infuriating and insulting that 13 Reasons Why chose shock value, so then people would watch the show as a way to start the conversation, which like what the fuck does that even mean? Anyway, we have Gil, spoilers ahead for season 3 episode 4. obviously. Gil is kidnapped by one of the main characters, Love. So there's two main characters that I'm talking about, Joe and Love. If you've not seen the show, Joe is like a stalker psychopath that kills people, and Love is basically the girl version of that, and they're married. It's a whole thing. Anyway, Gil is kidnapped by Love after he revealed himself to be an anti-vaxxer, which in itself, good on you, girl boss, for kidnapping him. The reason this infuriated Love so much is because Henry and Joe got infected with the measles, and this left Henry hospitalized, which Henry is their like newborn baby, like 6 months old, so that would be like very stressful as a parent to go through that. While he's kidnapped, Love and Joe try to find dirt on Gil so they can use that against him in order for them to like let him go without risking Gil telling the town that they had kidnapped him, because they realize that they could probably get away with it because Gil seems like a really nice guy. So Love hired her family's private investigator to get some dirt on Gil so they can blackmail him with that info, so then again they can release him without worrying about getting caught. This info leads Love and Joe to believe that Gil had bribed his son into going to college in Dartmouth, I think. The reality of the situation is way worse than a college scandal. Turns out Gil had no idea that this happened and that his wife bribed the school because there was evidence that showed that Gil's son had raped at least 2 girls. The first incident happened in Ohio, where Gil believed it would be a one-off, and then they moved to the town they're living in now, Marjorie Linda, so then they could start fresh. Then when his son, I'm assuming this was at college, attacked a second girl, and his wife paid the girl off so then she wouldn't say anything. Gil is genuinely shocked and upset about this because he only thought that his son had done this once and that he had changed since then, especially since the son was a teenager, so it could have been like, in Gil's perspective, something that was like a one-time incident. Maybe the son didn't like fully understand consent, it was a mistake, something like that, right? But if it happens twice, then a pattern's probably emerging. So Joe and Love leave him in the cage under Love's business, because Love has a bakery business and they have like a kidnapper's cage in the basement, just in case, you know, you never know when you're gonna need to kidnap and kill someone, I guess. So they leave him in the cage for a few hours and they check the baby monitor and they see that Gil has hung himself. We only see the aftermath of this occurring where Joe sees him dead on the baby monitor, but we don't even see it on the monitor. We like see it when they like rush to like the physical location, and like he and Love have to remove his body from the cage because previously in the show there was a woman that Love killed and she is presumed missing, so then they like came up with a plan to make it look like murder-suicide and that they were having an affair. Like, yes, this is fucked up, but let me explain why I think you did a better job at suicide than 13 Reasons Why. So Hannah was the main character in 13 Reasons Why, while Gil was a side character in You, which probably contributed to Gil's suicide being less grim due to it like not having as much of an emotional impact due to his character only being in a couple episodes and not being like fully fleshed out, unlike Hannah, who was the main character all throughout season 1. Even though it wasn't like grim, I still want to like thank like the creators of You for not making this like super insensitive. Even though Gil wasn't like a main character, I still want to give props to the show for not being insensitive about this topic and like giving it the sensitivity that it deserved, instead of it being as graphic as like the murders where you see the build up, like how it happens, the aftermath. With this you only see like the context of why he felt suicidal and like the aftermath of his death, if that makes sense. This suicide was treated like a tragedy and that like it wasn't Joe or Quinn's fault, which is true, but again is polar opposite to season 1 of 13 Reasons Why, where there's a bunch of tapes and all the people on the tapes are trying to figure out who killed Hannah when like she killed herself, she made that choice. And yes, it can be said that people that did horrible things to her, such as Bryce for raping her and raping her best friend in front of her, even though like he didn't know that Hannah was there, like that still caused a lot of turmoil and like contributed to her suicide. But at the end of the day, it was like her choice. And I think this is the reason why 13 Reasons Why failed. It's because like this show is solely centered around like the main character's suicide and like the glorification of this suicide through Clay, who's the other main character. Whether this was intentional or not, because Clay had a crush on her when she was alive and is dealing with this in death and thinks that like he could have saved her or something, but we'll never know for sure. Unlike 13 Reasons Why, You is about like the main antagonist being a stalker, a psychopath, a serial murderer, which just happened to touch on the topic of suicide. And there are like a lot of other shows who have like touched on suicide and done it justice. The main one I think of is Degrassi with the character of Campbell Saunders. There is an amazing video about that, linking 13 Reasons Why and Degrassi, and like again how 13 Reasons Why failed while Degrassi did something right. Just a side tangent, Degrassi didn't show the suicide. We don't know how Campbell died, but even then it was still impactful because we didn't see it coming. Like we kind of did, but like the other main characters didn't see it coming, which just showed like how good the writing was, how good the acting was, and like the sensitivity and thought that went into the show. And I think there was a live stream or something after this episode aired and like a bunch of resources and stuff that people could turn to, which like yes, 13 Reasons Why does have resources and that's great, but it doesn't help if like the show has caused harm and that's why they're like reaching these resources instead of like focusing on giving a serious topic the sensitivity it deserves. There are plenty of other shows that talk about suicide that don't receive as much criticism, even though it kind of like glorifies it. The main one I can think of is Skins UK, where Effie, a character from like seasons 1 till 4, she's kind of like ooh woo, like I'm mysterious, and like her like mental illness has a lot to do with that, and like everyone loves her, like she's in like a love triangle, or I guess technically like a love pentagon or something. Like everyone's in love with this girl because like she's mysterious and like she wears all black and she's like ooh woo. Again, this show isn't widely bashed due to the show is not like solely revolving around this topic, like they also explore other things, but in 13 Reasons Why the main thing is girl kills herself. Is it my fault? Spoiler alert, it is not. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that if a show like You that is so gory and graphic with murder and like showing someone dying from like poison or like being bludgeoned or whatever, and like, you know, showing like blood and all that kind of stuff, if they can show suicide in like a sensitive way that like doesn't provide shock value, then how did 13 Reasons Why, a show that was solely about mental health and trying to raise awareness, how did they do so much damage? Anyway, it's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Stay safe. I'll see you next time. Bye.